Good morning, College English. How are you? I hope everyone is doing well. We are going to pick up with Hamlet and Shakespeare in Act 3, Scene 1, which is where we left off. Now, I hope everyone has read this scene. If you have not yet read the scene, please, like I always ask you, eyes on the page before we begin. We're going to go through an analysis here of Act 3, Scene 1 and talk about what's going on here. And this is a very dense scene. There's a lot going on. So we really need to take it piece by piece. After you've read through it, I'm going to ask you to come back to this video and just kind of go through the sections because there's so much happening. So in the beginning of Act 3, Scene 1, we see King Claudius and Gertrude meeting with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And of course, we know that they've already set them to a task, right? Claudius has asked Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to basically spy on Hamlet and try to lift his spirits, to get him into some kind of activity, to draw him unto pleasures, he said, right? To try to lift his spirits. And we see that Claudius has asked them, did he receive you well, right? Most like a gentleman, of course, Rosencrantz said, but with much forcing of his disposition, Guildenstern says. So we see that, yes, he was kind to us, but he really had to work for it. And then we see the queen asked, did you essay him to any pastime? Did you get him to do anything fun? And hey, it just so happens that Deus Ex Machina, right, that a troupe of actors has arrived at the same time, and he got very excited about these actors, right, and asks the king and the queen to attend a play. We remember that from the end of Act 2, right? The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. We also see when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern exit, that the king and the queen address Ophelia and Polonius. We remember, of course, that Polonius has devised a plan to loose Ophelia upon Hamlet, right? To devise a meeting between the two of them to see if he can figure out and test if it really is Hamlet's love sickness that is bothering him. So he gives poor Ophelia a book to read, to pretend to read as she walks down the corridor, until Hamlet kind of bumps into her accidentally. And so we'll see how that goes, of course, right? Now, we notice that the queen and Claudius, before this whole thing with the whole spying thing begins, the king says, sweet Gertrude, leave us too, right? He asks Gertrude to leave. And he explains why. We have closely sent for Hamlet hither, that he, as 'twere by accident, may here affront Ophelia. Notice affront Ophelia as opposed to confront Ophelia. Just think about that. Her father and myself, lawful espials, right? We're going to spy, but it's lawful. It's okay that we're spying because we've got a good reason. Okay. We'll so bestow ourselves that seeing, we'll watch, observe, unseen, we may of their encounter frankly judge, and gather by him as he has behaved, if it be the affliction of his love or no that he thus suffers for. Look at the queen's response. I shall obey you. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Remember Hamlet, going back to Act 1, Madam, I shall in all my best obey you, or I shall in all my best obey you, madam, whichever it is. And then Ophelia addressing Polonius, right? I shall obey, my lord. And so we see this same pattern, right? What happens when we just obey and move forward? Keep that in mind as we move through the rest of the play. All right. Polonius sets up Ophelia. Ophelia, walk you here, and then he tells Claudius, gracious, so please you, we will bestow ourselves, right? We'll hide ourselves. Read on this book, he says to Ophelia, that show of such an exercise may color your loneliness. You'll show Hamlet that you're by yourself because you're reading, right? We are oft to blame in this, he says, 'tis too much proved, that with devotion's visage and pious action, we do sugar o'er the devil himself. That by seeming on the surface to be innocent, we cover over the evil actions themselves, or we seem to hide those evil actions. Consider Claudius's aside to that statement. "Oh, 'tis true," he says, "how smart a lash that speech doth give my conscience. The harlot's cheek beautied with plastering art is not more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to my most painted word. Oh, heavy burden." We see Claudius's guilt here coming through. We see the reality that Claudius knows exactly what he's done and he feels guilty for it, but he's covering it over and he's trying to make himself seem innocent. But we see that he's suffering internally, and that internal suffering is going to come to play later on, so we've got to watch for that. All right, Hamlet enters, and this is the famous "To Be or Not to Be" soliloquy. This is probably the most famous soliloquy from the entire play, and it's one that we really have to analyze carefully. So I'd like you to go through this. Of course, pause the video if you need to, come back to it, watch it again and again if you have to. But let's go through this carefully. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep, no more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep perchance to dream. Aye, but there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear? To grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all. And thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. Soft, you now the fair Ophelia. At this point, he turns and he speaks to Ophelia. So let's go back through the soliloquy. I'm going to do the rest of the scene in a separate video. I think there's enough in this soliloquy. We really need to focus on this here. So let's go back to the very beginning. We talk about this to be or not to be. It's not, people tend to say, oh, he's contemplating suicide and he wants to kill himself. No, he's not trying to kill himself in this scene. To exist or not to exist. To be or not to be. To fight or not to fight. To work against and to keep kind of fighting that good fight, right? To continue against all the difficulties of life, in spite of the difficulties of life. That's the question. Do we work hard at this, or do we just throw in the towel? Man, isn't that worth thinking about now, right? We have to work hard at this. We have to keep going. But Hamlet here is contemplating what it is that makes humanity work hard. Why do we confront the difficulties of this life? Why do we bother facing the hardships that are going to come in this life? There are many things that make mankind pause from just ending everything. And that's what Hamlet is thinking about here. That's really where his focus is. Whether or not it's better, nobler in the mind to suffer those slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, of crazy luck, right? Do I just deal with all the difficulties that this world is going to bring? Or do I take arms? Do I fight against that sea of troubles? And by opposing those troubles, end those troubles? There's the question, right? How do we do this? Why do we do it? We've got to take a stand, right? We've got to fight this. And we see this reflects a lot of Hamlet's internal conflict too, right? Where is he right now? He's trying to figure out, does he go through with this mission given to him by his father, or doesn't he? Why hasn't he taken action yet? We've got to go back and remember that the ghost, he's not sure if he can trust this ghost or not. Is it some function of the devil, right, to try to trap him or trick him into madness? Or is it legitimately the ghost of his father, and does he really need to take this revenge? He's got an instinctive feeling that he needs to do this, but he's just not sure, and that indecision is holding him back. Ultimately, this whole soliloquy comes back to the concept of indecision, right? What is death? Hamlet asks. To die. Is dying sleeping? No more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. Look at that word, H-E-I-R, heir to. We inherit these 1,000 natural shocks just for the sake of being human, right? By our very human nature, we inherit these things, these heartaches and the 1,000 natural shocks. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. A consummation is a joining, right? It's a coming together. It's a creation of something new, devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep. To sleep perchance to dream. Aye, but there's the rub, there's the problem, right? There's the issue. Because if we die, if we sleep, then what dreams will come? We can't know, right? We don't know what dreams will come. We don't know what we will face when we die, when we go into that eternal sleep. And so we have to be careful, right? When we have shuffled off this mortal coil, when we have dropped off our bodies, right? When we are nothing but a spirit, nothing but a soul, that must give us pause. That's got to make us stop and think. There's the respect, the thought, the issue that makes calamity of so long life, right? It's difficult because we don't know what's coming. Hold on. Sorry, I need to recharge. And here's Hamlet's question. Let's come back to this. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time? Who would put up with all of these difficulties? Look at this list of difficulties, right? The oppressor's wrong behaviors by an oppressor. The proud man's contumely, arrogance, right, annoyance. The pangs of despised love. We have to remember his issues with Ophelia right now too, right, what he's suffering. The law's delay, lack of justice. The insolence of office, this arrogance from people who are above you in station. The spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin. At this point in the play, usually Hamlet draws a dagger. And a dagger is a bare bodkin, okay? And so, of course, that makes us a little nervous, because what is he going to do? But he's just contemplating. Who would fardels bear, these pains, these annoyances, these problems bear, to grunt and sweat under a weary life? Who would do all this? But that the dread, the fear of something after death, that undiscovered country from whose bourne, whose shores, whose land, no traveler returns. Nobody ever comes back from that. Nobody tells us what's on the other side. That's what puzzles the will. That's what makes us struggle. And that, he says, is what makes us rather bear those ills we have, hold on to those problems that we have, face those problems that we have, rather than to fly to those we know not of. It's the old expression, the devil you know beats the devil you don't, right? Hamlet's basically saying that humans tend to face all of these problems and keep struggling through this difficult life because it's better to struggle through this difficult life than to face the unknowns of the afterlife. Thus, conscience, thinking through right and wrong, does make cowards of us all. Just a question for you to think about. Is he rationalizing his own cowardice and not getting his revenge yet? I don't know. It's just a thought. I just want you to think about that right now. And thus, the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought. And enterprises of great pitch and moment, with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. It's all of this thought, it's all of this processing, right? It's all of this native hue, the native color of resolution and resolve is sicklied over, is paled by overthinking. And enterprises, actions, ideas, plans of great pitch and moment, things we're really excited about, start to lose their enthusiasm, their momentum, the more we think about them. And so we see here Hamlet engaging in this moment of really overthinking. And he's contemplating overthinking. He's in this moment of metacognition, right? How much is overthinking slowing me down and keeping me back from doing what I need to do? And that's exactly the problem that we see him in right here, okay? So start to consider and start to contemplate how much this soliloquy characterizes Hamlet in this moment. What does it show us about the way he's thinking about himself, about his actions, about his plans, about Claudius, all right, about everything, really, about the bigger picture questions of life that Hamlet is struggling with right now. All right. There's going to be a second video in which we go through the rest of the scene because the scene is pretty big, and his interaction with Ophelia is definitely a dense one. I'm already at 17 minutes for this video. So I'm going to post this one for you, and then I'll make you another one for the second half of Act 3, Scene 1. All right? Have a great day.